The better you do, the better it looks for us and for you, obviously. Why would we want to drag you out only for no particular reason? We're only going to choose to do that if we need to. Hello and welcome to another vlog on YouTube and podcast on Spotify by the Fit Minds podcast. Coach Mariah here. So, a very relevant time to be doing a podcast on competition prep because the hype of the season often gets a lot of interest, generates this excitement around the idea of comp prep. So I decided to do an impromptu vlog on the concept of comp prep and some essential considerations for specifically first-time competitors, but certainly for seasoned competitors or even if you've only competed once before. So today we're going to be touching on quite a few different points and considerations. They won't necessarily be in order of priority, highest priority to lowest, but certainly the first few considerations would be what I would be considering on your timeline versus the ones towards the end. Now, before I get too deep into this podcast, I'm going to firstly discuss the concept that I actually discourage most people from entering a competition prep process. Yes, that's right. I discourage most people from prepping. And, there is a lot of romanticism around the idea of competition prep. There's not enough awareness as to the cost involved, the time commitment, the interruption to lifestyle, social isolation, and the significant difficulty of dieting and training intensively for prolonged periods of time. Also, in general, the heavy impacts on an individual's health. So your health markers are not something that you can sustain, certainly at a balanced level for your hormones, your digestive function as well. There's quite a few red flags that can appear in a comp prep, including things like micronutrient deficiencies and bone density issues as well. Doesn't mean that's normal for that to happen for every competitor, but this stuff can arise in a prep period. And the reason why I want to talk about that and address it before I get too deep into this podcast is because a lot of the factors I'm about to address will touch on the idea that not all of this is glamorous all of the time. In fact, it's only glamorous some of the time, which tends to be show day, and maybe if you're getting a few decent drops and getting leaner as you progress. But there's a lot of the dark side, the underbelly of comp prep that not a lot of people really talk about. This might seem counterproductive for my business and coaching because you would think that I would want more clients to compete, as this may present as a lucrative coaching opportunity. However, if you are a current coach in the comp prep industry, you'll be very aware that competition prep coaching is not actually that profitable. Due to the amount of time and effort we must invest into our competitors, the travel, accommodation, cost of tickets, parking, food, etc. for all of the shows that we attend, and our time at all of the shows as well, it all adds up. However, the major reason why a comp prep coach might remain in the industry is because we're passionate about it. And for myself, my major motivator is because I want to be able to prep clients in a safe, legal, and effective, responsible manner. As there are plenty of bro coaches out there who are unfortunately doing some serious damage to athletes in their prep and basically dropping them on their heads after they finish their prep with not a lot of guidance and information. So, if you've got this far in the podcast and I haven't already scared you off from comp prep, these are going to be some of the essential considerations you will need to make before you enter a comp prep phase, and I will try to list them in chronological order as I mentioned, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one is more important than the other. So call it a pre-comp checklist, if you will, and I will try and prioritize what I think you should do first and foremost versus what you probably experience more towards the end of your prep. So first and foremost, you have to know your why. What is the major motivator for entering a competition prep? Does it come from a place of wanting to challenge yourself and give yourself an opportunity to do something you've never done before? Or is it because you enjoy long-term gratification, working towards a goal, and you would like to see yourself on stage one day to see what condition you could possibly achieve? Or is it because you are seeking external validation? So we've all been that person looking at how many comments and likes and attention that we get from certain things. And certainly when you're a lot younger, I think it tends to die off as you get a little bit older. You realize that's not the be all and end all of life. Do you want to gain attention or traction on social media from strangers, receiving compliments from people you've never met? Are you looking for clout, from maybe your friends, your acquaintances, just literally people who mean nothing to you, people that, for example, might follow you and you've never even had a conversation with them? Do you think that competing will be the answer to this? And is it necessarily going to be a healthy relationship that you've established with your self-esteem? Are you simply competing because you want to win? That's one we see quite often with competitors. If you come to me and you tell me, I want to win, I want a sword, I want a big trophy, I want to win, I will be a little bit turned off. It'd be a bit of a red flag from my perspective, because of course everybody would like to do well. But being able to guarantee that you will win is practically gambling. You don't know who's going to rock up on the day. Is that the type of mentality that you're going with? As this is definitely not something I would recommend for a first-time competitor, let alone seasoned competitors. If you meet any seasoned competitors that have been back quite a few times, maybe they might be chasing an overall or a pro card. But you notice the tone where they say, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And that's okay. I'll just go again if I want to. There are people who have tried, multiple times in multiple seasons, but they're not going in saying, I'm going to win and I only want to win. They're just obviously very honest with themselves as to what the process can actually entail and how it can end up. Are you simply competing because you are looking for reassurance? You're looking for someone to validate you, not just the external validation, but to reassure you that you're worthy. And it's not just about the way that you look, but also about the way that you feel about yourself. Are you using this as an opportunity to boost self-esteem issues that you might already have that are quite deep-seated, and maybe you need to work on those? The issue with entering a competition prep with the motivation of gaining attention, external validation, or the intention to win, your first show, winning your first show, is that basically you're setting yourself up for failure in many ways. You're already setting yourself up for failure if you don't win, if it's anything but all black and white, right? The pressure that you place on yourself to win will unfortunately be your demise in your prep, slowly eating at you to the point where you actually don't enjoy your prep at all, and you think less about the fact that this is your journey, and you spend more time comparing yourself to others, which I have seen. I would say there's always one or two in my team every season that seems to get fixated on other competitors, and that is incredibly toxic in itself. Seeking external validation from social media, friends, colleagues, acquaintances, or even people you barely know will unfortunately see you in feeling, I guess, fairly empty if you're not celebrating your own wins intrinsically. So, those people aren't always going to be there to compliment you. They're not always going to be there to reassure you, and you're going to need some of that from yourself. Also, relying upon compliments, comments, likes to make you feel like you're worthy and ready for the stage can be a very slippery slope, rather dangerous. Even post-show, when you gain body fat in your reversal, as we all know that the attention and spotlight that was on you will eventually fade over a period of time. We've all been in that position where if you've competed before, where you're posting, photos of yourself where you're quite conditioned, peel back the layers, you've got all this definition and people are really impressed by you. And then you go back to normal life and you realize that as you go back to normal life, you gain a bit of body fat, you look like a normal human being, people pay you less attention. And that can sometimes get really frustrating because you think, well, hold on, how can they put me on a pedestal before? I'm still the same person, I've still got the same muscle, but I've got a bit more body fat and I'm healthy. And now they all of a sudden don't give a shit about me and they're not impressed, by my physique. And this is the matter of the fact is that bodybuilding is rather, I guess, brutal like that, in that if you get, depressed and down and sad because you've dropped off from this, I don't know, kind of like feeling like a king or a queen for a while, and then you've gone back into your standard social network and circle and your friendship circle, pay attention to who sticks around in that time, as they are probably going to be your true and close connections that mean a lot more than those surface level connections online. So for a more sustainable and healthier approach, your competition prep mentality will come from a place where you are intrinsically motivated. So it comes from within. You do not place any expectations on your prep or your placings. I think the competitors I've seen that have been the most grateful, the most humble and kind, and just really have enjoyed their experience of prep and show day for that matter, have gone into it with this headspace of, I don't expect anything, and if I do achieve something, I'm really quite grateful for that. But even outside of that, just getting here is a fantastic celebration of my accomplishments. Not only will you enjoy the process more if you're simply engaging in it for personal reasons, but you will also have a better time with your mental health if you're not reliant upon the confidence-boosting feedback from strangers, even from judges that you've never met. Secondly, and I would say just as importantly, is understanding which coach that you're planning to work with, okay? So finding and researching for the duration of your comp prep. This is incredibly important because this person is going to end up being your partner in crime, okay? Your rock, your mentor, and the person sitting in the passenger seat giving directions and guidance towards the finish line every single day of your prep, or, if in the early stages of prep, probably not as much like communication-wise, but and if your coach is a person, like if you've signed up with somebody and you don't talk to them much, and you do your 5-minute check-in and you get on with your week and you don't talk to them again for another week or two, I don't necessarily think that, for some people that might work if you are self-accountable, but I don't necessarily think that's going to give you the full experience of coaching that you deserve. So there are coaches out there that do invest a lot of time and energy. I am one of them. I'm absolutely, utterly obsessed with my clients. And I don't think there is such a thing as too much communication. I think it's actually essential to establish a really strong connection with a client, to establish trust, okay? So obviously, I won't go too deeply into the exact traits that you should be looking for in a coach, as this is not about whether or not you're looking for the perfect coach. But equal importance should be placed on yourself as a competitor, as your coach. So I do hear a lot of people talking about, like, is this coach right? And what does this coach do? And, what are they known for? And would you refer them? And blah, blah, blah. And there's all this kind of, sometimes gossip in the industry as well. And the matter of fact is that sometimes you don't even realize that a lot of it comes down to the athlete. It's a two-way street. It's not all about how diligent your coach is or how overqualified they are for the position. They don't need a master's in nutrition or dietetics. And it's also not about how many overall wins they've achieved for their clients or whether they got one in the last season, because we all know it depends on whether you have a good athlete or at least a good foundation to start with to get an overall. So sometimes we might just get lucky and someone will come to us who is a genetic freak and will be able to do things, that will get them to that position, but we don't know. Most of us don't know. We will not know whether or not our clients are going to win an overall. We would hope that maybe one of them will, but it doesn't mean that we know beforehand. As you don't know, obviously, how many clients they might have on their books at any given point in time, and perhaps they may only be talking about their wins and not about their clients who may not have done so well placing wise. And I see this quite a lot in the industry, that there are coaches that might have, 50 to 60 or even up to 100 clients through their books on slightly cheaper rates, and only celebrating the ones that have achieved great success. And so you don't often see or hear about their clients that haven't achieved anything that they want to post on social media. I actually have a smaller client base. I'm not super cheap, but I'm not expensive. But I'm kind of in a position where I'm affordable enough for people to be able to come to me for comp prep coaching, but I'm not so cheap that I have 100 clients and that I, basically only pay attention to the ones that are doing well. So I have seen in the industry though that this can happen. You know, I know people who've competed before and their coach has never said anything, haven't mentioned anything about them competing, maybe because they didn't place top 3 or, you know, they just didn't think they were worthy of mentioning, which is quite sad because I think every single competitor is worthy of mentioning because every single competitor has a completely separate journey and completely separate celebrations and wins to the next. Despite placings, absolutely despite placings. There are some coaches who will trap you in this, false pretense, unfortunately leading to, a false sense of security with your expected accomplishments leading into your show. So sometimes you can look at them and go, well, they got an overall last season and they should be able to get me one as well. And I think sometimes that sets you up for disappointment if you don't get that win, obviously, because then you were expecting that from the coach that delivered it for the previous client. Obviously, it is incredibly important to work with a coach who is fully qualified, registered and insured, and you would be surprised how many coaches that people are working with, that you might have worked with yourself, that are currently working in the industry who do not meet the minimum mentioned criteria. Okay, so qualifications, insurance, registration. There is I would say honestly less than, maybe less than 50 coaches that I know of, easily in the industry that are fully insured, registered, and they are fully qualified as well, especially in nutrition. There are literally coaches who are well known in the industry that are walking around without qualifications and insurance. And you might think it's not super important, but if something terrible happens to you and your health, you are screwed because there's no insurance. They're screwed as well, and you're in really hot water there. And also too, the qualifications actually allow them to practice in a way that is better for your health. It's also important to understand that it's going to cost you a significant amount of money for your coaching services to be covered. Coaches are not cheap, okay? And that's for a very good reason. They spend a significant amount of time communicating with you weekly. But if a coach is fairly cheap, as I mentioned previously, and it seems too good to be true, it probably is. In some cases, if you are very self-accountable, you will not require high communication, however. So that's important to know that, and the thing is too, is a lot of people say they don't, and trust me, you end up being one of those people. But in most cases, okay, I will say 95% of the time, you're going to require a coach who is rather available, communication-wise, from the start all the way through to prep, and especially towards the end. Communication levels will be at an all-time high, and as they should be. I really do expect it to happen towards the end of a prep, and I think that a coaching price will reflect that, plus covering the costs of attending shows and all of the previous costs mentioned. So don't question a coach's prices. However, if they are through the roof, if they're charging you $200, $250 a week, and you don't think you're getting a lot included in that, if your posing isn't included in that, you probably need to question why. If they are highly reputable, they're globally well known, there are some coaches out there that will be that expensive, you probably would be able to justify that. In most cases, shopping around for a coach is incredibly difficult, as obviously you haven't worked with the person before, so it makes it exceedingly hard to figure out whether or not they will be right for you, okay? One of the best things that you can do is have a chat to anyone that you know who is currently competing or who has competed in the past, anyone that they might recommend, then possibly look into researching their website, social media pages for testimonials and results. So this is why I always keep my results and testimonials up to date, because I think that it's important to have that type of really raw material for clients to go by and go, cool, okay, this coach is not only, producing great results for their clients, but their clients actually like working with them. And not just that, it's continuous. It seems to be over and over and over again that this coach is working with people and they're actually quite content. As well as obviously looking at their pricing and inclusions in comparison to other coaches who may have achieved similar accomplishments for their clients in the industry. So I mentioned I wasn't going too deep into this, but this is just basic stuff. You will often find that many coaches are going to be fairly similar priced, especially if they're fairly well known in the industry. Or even so, we all know each other as well, so we're fairly up to date with what we all have as our own pricing structure. For example, those who mostly coach natural athletes into natural bodybuilding shows versus those who coach mostly PED using athletes into non-tested federations. Sometimes the coaches that do prescribe PEDs will charge more because it takes more time to be able to do that. Okay, so that's just sometimes and also the risk involved with doing something that is actually considered illegal. This is also why it can be incredibly helpful and something I strongly suggest doing, working with a coach in your off season leading into your shows. So I think I got 7 for season 8 at this point. Sometimes I get a few after a show. Of those 7, I have all of them on board with me already, bar one, because I know what she's doing and I know she's perfectly fine. I know what condition she's in. And season B next year, so 2024, I actually have 11 of 12 or 10 of 12, and 2 of those are starting in like 2 months. So there you go. It's literally, more than a year out from their, roughly a year out from their show, where they have been working in their off season. They've been able to do it by themselves, but they're still starting early. But I do have a lot of competitors. Of the competitors I've got in my books at the moment, I think, so the 10 of the 12 are already working with me in an off season. So there you go. When you're wondering where all these people come from that have these amazing rigs, they've actually done a bit of work beforehand with a coach. It's not just a shotgun prep. Obviously, especially if you need to grow muscle into your division, which most people will need to do, this gives you enough of an opportunity to start to get to know your coach and figure out whether or not you click and work well together. This leads me to my next point. You will need to give yourself plenty of time to be ready for your chosen divisions, which would be something that you would discuss with your coach once you've decided on the right person for you. It's incredibly detrimental to understand that it will actually take a lot longer for you to be ready for a show than you might believe. Years ago, it would be appropriate to do a comp prep of, say, 12 to 16 weeks because the level of conditioning required was much lower in the past. So my first prep was 16 weeks, although I did start, I think, like 4 kilos above my stage weight, which was interesting. So probably didn't actually need that long. Nowadays, we see prep specifically, and I won that show as well. So there you go. I was an example of a genetic freak that, yes, had spent 7 years training already, and I just decided to do a prep. I think it was about 18 weeks out I decided, and then I did a 16-week prep, but I was already 4 kilos from my stage weight. So you really have to understand that sometimes that goes into the equation as well. When you look at competitors and you go, oh, that person's amazing or did really well, sometimes they're pretty much prep ready and comp ready anyway because of their prior history of training. Nowadays, we see prep, specifically body fat, being cut down for anywhere from 20 to 40 weeks, so fat loss phases, which is a considerably long time. But obviously it depends on how much you have to lose in the beginning as to how long your cut down process will need to take. So this is why assessing your body composition is really important before understanding how long your prep will actually need to be. This is often why doing shotgun preps may not be a very smart idea, especially if you are quite high in body fat and really low in muscle mass. You wouldn't expect much from a prep where you're kind of clicking your fingers and saying, look, I want to compete now, but you haven't actually done a lot of work in the way of building muscle or losing fat, either of those prior to that shotgun prep. A longer prep would be far more successful with plenty of time prior to grow and or lean down for your divisions, depending on what you need to do. If you do approach a coach too close to a season to accomplish a goal that you would like to, and do not achieve the level of muscle mass or conditioning you wanted to, it is not your coach's fault. And please don't try to push a coach into doing this. I've seen and even experienced this a few times myself where clients have been, it's been 15 weeks out from a season and I've had someone approach me and say, hey, I'd love to do a prep, for the next season. And I'm like, you mean season B? And they've said, oh no, I want to do season A. And I'm like, that's really interesting because I don't think you're in the condition to be able to do season A. It's not realistic. So don't approach your coach. And then if you push them to do it and you're not ready in time, don't be angry at your coach. We can't work miracles in 15 weeks, 10 weeks, sometimes 20 weeks, depending on how long you actually need. The more body fat you have or the less muscle you have, the longer we need, right? So, and it's not your coach's fault that you didn't have enough time under your belt to reach this goal if you've approached your coach and pushed this particular season or date. So mapping out a realistic timeline with your coach is crucial. This may sometimes come as a shock because you might believe that you have enough muscle to compete already. The amount of people I think that have come into a coaching experience with full confidence, they've got heaps of muscle, and then they've stepped on stage and realized, holy shit, I'm tiny. But even being told, hey, I think you need to grow. I think you need to grow a bit longer. Can we spend a bit longer in an off season? And sometimes competitors will see that as, oh, this person's trying to make money from me because they want me to, drag it out. And it's like, no, our number one goal is for you to do well, because if you think about it, if you do well, then you are a great testimony for us, okay? So the better you do, the better it looks for us and for you, obviously. Why would we want to drag you out only for no particular reason? We're only going to choose to do that if we need to. If we could have you on stage in 20, 30 weeks and you are ready and you are like super competitive and we think, this person could do well, just looking at them, why would we not take you on for a season sooner? It would make more sense to do that. So don't think that your coach is trying to make money from you if they're trying to get you in off-season coaching. They're actually trying to help you. And a lot of people aren't willing to invest in off-season coaching, which I think is quite disappointing, because this is actually where you make all of your growth. It's a very important time in your bodybuilding journey. And everybody should do an off-season. If not, if they're already, my 7 years of training was a very obviously long off-season. I was already training, hypertrophy training, tracking my macros. I'd already grown quite a considerable amount of muscle because I went straight into figure. So you don't often see that. It will definitely obviously depend on which division you'd like to prep into. You'd be surprised how much muscle is actually required for each division, okay? And the level of body fat, also conditioning that you're required to achieve to be stage lean. It is quite extreme. But my recommendation at a minimum would be spending 6 months to 1 year in a build for bikini clients starting from scratch. Minimum, okay? For different federations, maybe longer. Or 6 months to a year if you do not need to gain that much muscle in your choice of division. So let's say, for example, you want to do sports or fitness and you need to just broaden your back a little bit. It's not that much. So you will be able to, again, discuss this with your coach. And in some cases, you'll need to spend a whopping 2 to 3 years growing into your division, and sometimes even longer. If you want to go straight into figure, you might have to go that little bit longer depending on your own genetics and responses to the stimulus, which will also mean that you will be mentally prepared for consuming a larger amount of calories. And sometimes, and most of the time, accurately tracking your food or following a meal plan. So obviously, if you're wanting a really effective off-season, you do have to track. You can go through periods of time of flexible eating. Maybe it's for 6 months because your show is a long time away. But I think certainly returning back to as close as possible to your show. So if you can do it a year out or a year and a half out and you want to progress that a little bit more, you're not growing as much muscle as you wanted to, like I did recently, engaging in a 6-month growth process just to kind of give myself that little bit extra. For some people, this process can seem fairly restrictive. However, if you find the right coach for you who is educated in the process of flexible dieting, you'll actually find this process is fairly simple and can be quite enjoyable. Despite needing to consume more calories than what you might actually feel like eating for the day. So this is talking about having to grow and eat more food. You'd be surprised how much food you might need to consume just to grow enough muscle for your chosen divisions. After the point of reaching an optimal amount of muscle mass, a timeline for your cut down process should be considered. This can be mapped out with your coach, and this often is where you can establish exactly which season you'll be ready to prep into. Remembering that the stage will always be there, and there is absolutely no rush to prep into the next season or next year for that matter. A lot of people get fascinated with competing instantly, so that's why I made this podcast. And unfortunately can pull the trigger a little bit too soon to start their prep, not giving themselves enough time to be ready, or at least competitive, okay? You might be ready, but you might not have all of the criteria required for that particular division because you just obviously didn't take the time to adjust and improve prior to stepping on stage. The next consideration should be of the financial cost of the entire competition prep process. Depending on how many shows you choose to do in that season, this is something that you'll be able to establish with your coach as well. Discussing federations which may be best suited to you will be dependent on many things, including what type of physique that you have and what they are looking for. This will help to determine what your budget and costs will be for your prep. Keeping in mind, all of the costs which will include comp coaching fees, posing classes or coach fees. So sometimes you get a one-on-one posing coach. Registration, okay, for your divisions, membership, because you need to pay that for the federations that you compete in for each show, okay. Not if it's for a federation, you've got multiple shows in that federation, you only have to do membership once each year, which is good. Hair, tan and makeup, okay, for each show. Professional stage shot photography on show days. Bikinis or figure suits or trunks, heels, okay, for the ladies. Photo shoots plus the outfits and even flights and accommodation if you would like to travel to national shows. So you can see how it can quickly add up. One of the other benefits of competition prep is that you will obviously not be eating out or having takeaway, so you will obviously save money, okay? This is an area where you'll be able to contribute back towards topping up your competition prep piggy bank. To give you an average idea of the cost of a season for doing, say, for example, just 2 shows, the last season I competed in, I spent $6,000 to $7,000, and that wasn't actually very lavish. And that was not including coaching fees because I coached myself into double pro status in that season. I did have to 2 figure suits, custom made for my shows as well. So inclusive of that, the one area I didn't want to skimp on was my figure suits because they're very special to figure athletes, mainly because we don't feel as glamorous. So sometimes we splurge on our figure suits. However, for some federations, the cost of the bikinis, hair, tan, makeup, and even registration can be incredibly expensive. WBFF is up there as an example of one of the most costly federations to compete in. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, which can see the cost of a competition even reaching the level of $10,000 if you're also planning to do photo shoots, etc., etc. Wild. So if you are on a budget, it might be a good idea to simply do 1 to 2 shows maximum. I suggest trying 2 different federations, possibly choosing a show that is in your state and close to where you live as well, so it takes out the travel and accommodation, maybe limiting yourself to 1 bikini, maybe 1 figure suit or trunks. I do not suggest doing your own tan, hair and makeup, as this is something that is best left to the professionals who know how to put together a stage package on the day. But certainly at minimum, get your tan done by the tanning crew, because that's a special comp prep tan. You really can't do it yourself or you will get marked down. But if you do want to do your hair and makeup and you're pretty good at doing it yourself, I honestly don't think there's any sort of issue with that. If you'd like to save money on, say, a second show. In reference to the costs involved in competition prep, one of the last things that you will need to be thinking about early on in your journey is what your bikini will look like, which heels to buy, etc., etc. I think I see a lot of people kind of, the second they choose to do a prep, that's the first thing they're thinking about, which is pretty typical for women. Women tend to focus on all of the sparkly stuff and a lot less on what's required of them as an athlete, which is quite interesting. This is something that you can work out later down the track and your coach will help you out with. Having a bikini prepared and made will be something that you could look at, for example, at 16 weeks out from your first show. It is not a high priority, but of course it will be something that you will need to consider when you do enter a comp prep journey. Heels a little earlier on, because these will be something that you'll need to practice in. So I get them as soon as you start doing posing classes, etc. You'll also need to understand the time commitment required to enter a competition prep phase. Very, very important. Obviously, you're going to be required to prepare your own meals, as no one is going to do that for you. If you are tracking macros, you're going to need to track them in your MyFitnessPal diary every day. You will also need extra time in your day to be able to engage in your training, your steps, and potential cardio, which can look like 4, 5, or 6 days of training, plus obviously added steps and cardio. Not always with cardio, obviously, which will all take up a significant amount of time. If you are an incredibly time-poor person or you are poorly organised, it's probably not going to be a good idea to take on a comp prep, especially if you have too much happening in your life currently. The last thing we want to see for competitors is an impact on your sleep because you've not organised yourself prior efficiently. So creating structure and routine in the early days of your comp prep, perhaps even in your off season, will be the best way to sort yourself out for a successful season ahead. A huge mistake I've seen with first-time competitors is not achieving enough sleep. High stress levels and simply not having a break, so not having any sort of time to do anything that you need to do and not getting any of it done, having simply just too much on your plate. Sometimes even studying full-time, working full-time, holding down a relationship, etc., whilst doing a comp prep, which unfortunately can put a lot of pressure on lots of different facets of your life. Sleep is incredibly essential in prep, and if you can't reach your minimum 8 hours, you're going to be in for a bad time, and unfortunately probably not facilitate a very effective muscle gain or fat loss phase at all. Because sleep is an essential tool in this process, reduced sleep time and/or quality will negatively impact both of these processes dramatically. Competing in bodybuilding can be considered somewhat of a selfish sport. in essence, yes, absolutely, I would agree with that statement. But by the same token, it's very important to surround yourself with a supportive network if you are going to engage in a comp prep. Obviously, not everybody is going to understand why or how you're doing it, but as long as you have a handful of people surrounding you to encourage you and cheer you on through the process, you'll have a much better time of your prep. Try to steer clear of people who are negative about your comp prep, okay, because it's obviously not going to make for a very enjoyable experience, and obviously just distance yourself as much as possible from them for the duration of your prep. As I say in prep to my clients, protect your peace at all costs. Protect your prep and your peace at all costs. There are going to be obvious impacts on your relationship, your career, and if you have children, they're going to be feeling the pinch too, which obviously can be pretty heartbreaking for mums, but it is just a simple fact. Anyone who is a mum and who has prepped before, they get very strong mum guilt all the way through. So it sometimes can be very hard to battle that. Another thing is obviously things like your libido, so your sex drive will be impacted in prep. It is inevitable. It's usually a drop in sex drive, and that will definitely start to impact your relationship in pretty drastic ways if you don't have a sound understanding and communication with one another. Obviously, you are going to have to commit more time to an endeavor on a daily basis. So this means that sometimes you're going to need to take time away from things that you may have previously done and time that you may have previously invested into others. This can come as a rude shock to some. Unfortunately, it's not always well received, especially by partners. And obviously children, they don't know any better, who may not be very encouraging of the process, but that's more so some partners just don't like comp prep, and because of the impacts on the relationship, or maybe it might change a person's personality, which is another thing to be very wary of, that your personality and the way that you interact with other people will absolutely change in prep. You will also need to notify your workplace, because towards the end of prep, you'll start to lose concentration, and there may be impacts on your quality of work, but also in general the safety that you have for yourself and others in your workplace. This is why it's exceedingly important to look at taking a week off or at least a few days off work in the lead up to each one of your shows. So that's another thing to note. Don't be the hero trying to work all the way through your peak week. And the reason for that is because you also want to relax into your show. So most of the time peak weeks are great. You've got a bit more food, if you're doing it right, if you've gotten conditioned enough by the time your show has come around. But you still need to relax. So taking that time off work is so important, especially in your peak week. If your relationship can survive a competition prep, it really can survive anything, along with renovating your house and having a baby. Okay, so honestly, I wholeheartedly believe, and obviously I'm about to have a baby myself. You probably can't even really notice in this podcast, but going through stressful times in a relationship, one of the most stressful times I've experienced is certainly prepping, either myself or my partner prepping, but you get used to it. And I think the more that you do it, or if you've done it separately, the easier it gets. You're going to have to get used to the feeling of being tired, exhausted, and pushing through and building resilience. Like, you're not the only person who feels this way in prep. As much as you might think sometimes that you are isolated and you're alone, there are many other people going through the same experience to get to the stage, to stand next to you. This is fairly normal, okay, in comp prep, and it doesn't matter how many times you tell your coach that you feel wrecked, it's a part of the process. Unfortunately, dieting and intensive training is not gentle on the body. Nobody ever said competition prep was a healthy sport. Obviously, at a certain point, you can still maintain your health markers and healthy blood levels, but there will be a tipping point in prep, it's different for everybody, where this will just change. You will start to feel like your feet are dragging along the ground, your eyeballs are burning, and you can't string a sentence together. And in fact, you may even start inventing words, which I have done in prep myself. But usually this is rather temporary and doesn't last any longer than a few weeks at a time, because if you've done it right, again, you don't have to be here for so long. If you have given yourself enough time to be ready for stage, you'll be able to take diet breaks, which will usually look like 7 to 10 days or even longer on slightly higher calories to give you some respite. There is such a thing as things like refeed days, but unfortunately they only really give you mental relief as opposed to metabolic repair and actually helping out with increasing your heart rate, which is why we generally look at the 7 to 10 days as much handier than just that refeed day. If your coach is putting you through a lengthy comp prep and is not giving you diet breaks and you have plenty of time to be ready, you might need to look at changing coaches. Diet breaks are not a negative thing. If they're done wisely, and obviously where we take you to maintenance calories, they won't make you gain body fat. And I've never, ever, ever had a client gain body fat on a diet break. Sometimes you will simply not have to take diet breaks. You won't have the time to take them, depending on how much body fat you have to lose. But in most cases, they can actually be incredibly beneficial for metabolic repair. So this is why I like to have more time for a client to cut down than what we even originally planned for. So give yourself just that little bit of breathing room so we can take those breaks. You'll also need to get used to the feeling of being hungry, of course, which obviously is going to be mostly fairly uncomfortable. It will be somewhat of a permanent state, okay, and you will not feel full for the most of your competition prep. This is incredibly normal and something that is more mind over matter than anything. Dieting long-term is somewhat of a skill. In any normal given circumstances, it's obviously not encouraged to welcome the feeling of hunger. It's not like we want to try and drag our meals out all day, and if you are dieting, it'll happen, but for months and months and months on end, it's not unnecessary. But in a comp prep phase, hunger is going to be something that you become very familiar with, and if anything, it becomes a little bit addictive. And this is where eating disorders can come into it, where we can see that high risk. As with hunger comes fat loss, obviously, not always, but that's generally the consensus, and achieving that conditioned state that is required of you. Oftentimes, it's getting used to this uncomfortable feeling and learning how to distract yourself, keep your eye on the goal, and know that this feeling is temporary. With sleep deprivation, hunger levels will be worse, okay? So we see a bit of insulin resistance, and therefore you basically don't have as much of an ability to respond to carbohydrates as an energy source. So the less sleep you get, the worse that is. And basically you just get hungrier and hungrier, and your hunger hormones go through the roof. So this is one of the major reasons why I recommend ensuring you have a polished sleep routine. Another consideration is going to be your ability to adhere to your coach's plan and practice transparency with your coach. One of the major problems you'll come across in the coaching industry, or that we will as coaches, and probably athletes don't think about very much, unfortunately, is the dishonesty of competitors with their coaches and their inability to follow a fairly simple and structured plan. If you have made multiple attempts at following a designated plan from your coach, it might be time to discuss whether or not it's realistic for you. Okay, that's the first thing. For example, whether or not you're enjoying the meals that you're eating, or perhaps the workload in your training program is excessive. Even then, however, it's important to know that there is going to be a level of discomfort required, and certainly a requirement to push your training more than what you would for an average training program. And the reason being, you are trying to achieve an extraordinary goal, which will require extraordinary effort. If you have repeatedly had trouble adhering to a plan, maybe because you've become complacent or disorganized, it would be considered that maybe competition prep is just not right for you, at least not right now. And that you may need to focus on establishing a little bit more discipline with your daily routine and choices. This may also require the psychological assistance of a psychologist, or perhaps a life mentor prior to commencing your competition prep. Sometimes working on some self-development before you choose to engage in a comp prep can be incredibly beneficial for shifting your mindset and focus to where it needs to be. So, I even myself went through 3 years of recovery from an eating disorder, and I worked with a psychologist over that duration, well before I competed. So I think I spent 3 years in recovery, and 4 years later I competed. I made sure I had a healthy relationship with food. I knew that I wasn't ready, number one, ever to compete at that point of what I thought I was, wanting to do. Like, I wanted to be really competitive if I ever did compete, and I had very high standards for myself. And not just that, I wanted to get to a point where I was mentally in a really good headspace with my food, and I no longer had an eating disorder, and I was, really, really concreted in myself and self-confident without having to rely upon being super lean all the time or anything like that. So I actually, weirdly enough, defaulted to establishing all of those really healthy types of, mental habits and behaviors well and truly before I ever did a comp prep. And I think I just did that subconsciously, if anything, but I've seen a lot of people jumping in too soon because they just want to be on stage, and they want especially the instant gratification. And unfortunately, they haven't done the mental work. They haven't developed internally. Practicing honesty with your coach about your training, your food, choices and adherence, and your steps is essential, okay? So if you are snacking, binging, or eating over your calorie allotments continuously, or even once a week, that's not a good sign, because it goes to show that you won't be able to participate in the comp prep. Yes, it is that strict. It's a conversation you'll need to have with your coach urgently. It's not something that you have a conversation about, in weeks to come. It's talking to your coach and saying, look, I don't think I'm mentally prepared for this just yet. I need a little bit more time to work on my adherence. If you find yourself hiding your food choices or lying to your coach, then blaming your coach or the calories that you're on because you do not look the way that you want to, this is going to come down to how much responsibility you take. And unfortunately, this happens a lot more often than you would like to think. Just remember that there is no shame in making mistakes with your food and your training. Maybe some days you're struggling to hit your mark with your steps, or perhaps others you've had trouble controlling yourself with food, or maybe in the off season you're having trouble eating enough food. So this is why you need to iron out the creases, okay, in the beginning of a comp prep before you get too deep in. So this is what we do pre-preps for. That's why you should be doing an off season with a coach. And establishing healthy habits with food, training and mindset prior to commencing an official comp prep. This is where you can work with your coach extensively on this. Just remember that your coach is not your parent, okay? And is not an army sergeant. We're not here to push you and yell at you or punish you or motivate you, okay? Yes, we're here to give you encouragement and support and probably be very realistic and blunt with you, because we kind of have to be that person who does both. But by the same token, it's not my job to chase you down if you haven't been doing your workouts. If I see that you haven't done your workout in your calendar today, I'm not going to go, oi mate, why haven't you done your workout today? It's like, that's in your calendar. That's where your prompts come from. So that's where your check-ins come in, where we have to look at that accountability. You are the only person, okay, who is responsible for your self-discipline and routine, okay? It is not the responsibility of your coach to establish your self-accountability. It can be something that we can instill in you, but just understand it actually creates a lot of drama and a lot of work for a coach. If you haven't done this prior, if you haven't worked on self-accountability and you're expecting your coach to spoon feed you or to do everything for you, you're going to be in for a shitty time. You are also not to punish yourself. If you've not established the groundwork and framework for a successful comp prep mindset, you're probably going to fall and fail often and fairly soon, okay? Your coach can give you the tools for success, and trust me, we throw them at you, like we drown you in tools, things to help you. It is up to you as to whether or not you would like to learn from, apply, and execute them effectively, okay? That is your decision. Your check-ins with your coach, on another note, are an opportunity for some external accountability, okay? So this is why we have check-ins. Obviously, to check in to see how you're going, whether or not the plan may require adjustments, and what improvements there are yet to be made, and which direction we're going in, okay? Take advantage of your check-ins. Your coach is not a 24-hour hotline. And you do have a check-in day for a reason. So obviously messaging your coach here and there is great. But if you're not doing your check-ins, then you're messaging your coach every day, you've got to understand that they have that structure for a reason. Otherwise, you're literally interrupting other things they're doing, which is probably setting up clients, updating programs, and even other people communicating outside of their check-ins as well. So as much as what I love open communication, I absolutely do. But the way I see it is that, I guess, if you are not taking advantage of a set check-in and saying to yourself, well, I'm just going to avoid this altogether and I'm going to randomly message my coach, this doesn't give us an opportunity to have continuity. So basically, if it's weekly or fortnightly, whatever that looks like, monthly, we need to touch base at that frequency to then measure from the last month or the last week or the last fortnight, because data is everything for us. And obviously to figure out where you are currently. And if we then only get a check-in every few weeks intermittently, it's really not going to help us. And we need you to help us help you. If you are avoiding your check-ins or missing the deadline for a submission, okay, or you're late, you unfortunately are lagging behind, you're not taking your coaching process seriously enough, and you do not respect your coach. If you're a person who returns your check-ins late, and I'm going to say this because I've got a few of them myself, you do not respect your coach. And you don't respect their time, because you don't know how many other clients might give them a late check-in, okay? And therefore their whole day is then completely off and their routine and their structure is gone. We need structure just as much as what everybody else does. So that's why we have cutoff times, designated times for check-ins. And there are some coaches out there that if you miss the deadline, they just don't return your response. So just keep that in mind, that this is all a part of you becoming a comp prep athlete and getting stringent with every part of your life, including the way that you interact with your coach. It's incredibly important that you respect your coach so that they can give you the equal amount of respect in return, okay? It's a two-way street, as I said previously, and your coach's time is valuable just as yours is. Obviously, you're paying them a fee. Okay, everyone says that, we're paying them a fee. But if you are taking up like hours on a daily basis or an hour each day of their time each week, not in your peak weeks, not close to show, but every week, ask yourself how much you are actually paying them on hourly on average, okay? Because you'd be surprised, it'd be about $2. From that fee split up over that time, and would you work for that price? And I've talked about this in a previous podcast. Being a coachable client is somewhat even more important for a comp prep client because of how strict and how stringent and how limited the time, even if it's a long period of time, you have to achieve a goal. It's so important that you respect your coach. And that gives them, honestly, like if you respect your coach too, you'd be surprised how much they will actually give you willingly. On the same note, if you're not capitalizing from your coaching experience or the other way, and you're not checking in with your coach on check-in days, not logging data, okay, is another one. Simply becoming complacent with the process, not doing your weigh-ins, not doing your check-in photos, getting lazy. You need to question whether or not you're actually giving your coach enough to work with, okay? Otherwise, they're working blind. And if your care factor is truly there for your comp prep, do not expect your coach to be more invested in your journey than you. You are the person who's going to have to put in all of the effort. You're the person who cares the most. As much as what I care extensively about people's comp preps, you're the person who's going to care the most. Your coach is the person who sits in the passenger seat, but you are driving the vehicle. They're not going to be there every second of the day, okay? In every step, okay? To hold your hand or spoon feed you, that is not their job. Practicing gratitude for the people who help you through your prep, including your coach, your partner, okay? Because there's more than just your coach. You've got support people, your partner, your friends, is incredibly important. Don't be that guy that walks around with their head in the air thinking they've done this all by themselves. Even when I prepped myself, my partner was my rock. He was like my coach that didn't give me protocol. He just was, and I've been that way to him this prep as well, right? It's like he's got a coach who gives him protocol and he does his check-ins, but I've been his major moral support every day, talking to him every morning, just making sure all the way through prep that he's feeling okay and being there for him. And you'll all have that person, whether it's your friends and family, partner, maybe a coach a little bit as well. So don't get me wrong, most of the effort will come from you. It's 90%, okay? Will come from you. But a small thank you to those who've helped you along the way can be so valuable and so precious and can often make you realize that you couldn't have done it alone. If you do think you need a PT, this is something I've seen lately, for the process of comp prep, you probably shouldn't be prepping, or maybe you need it now, but close to prep, I think that's just not required. There will be times when you need to push yourself in the gym, okay, by yourself. And this is a learned skill which can be practiced over time, becoming self-driven and accountable, okay? Comp prep is as autonomous as it gets, okay? Because you're going on a journey that is for you and you're stepping on stage. So the autonomy needs to be there with your pushing, because there's days when you're flogged and you're tired. Your coach might not be in your head. They don't know that you're experiencing that. So you're going to have to be able to flick that switch, okay? Get used to the idea that you're not going to feel motivated most of the way through your prep. In fact, you're going to progressively become less motivated. But it is definitely a mental game, celebrating small wins and realizing that the journey is going to be more painful than it will be pleasurable. Looking forward to your end goal, every little decision and choice and day adds up over time. If you are not a patient person, bodybuilding and comp prep is not for you. You must be patient. Everything will take time and effort in prep, even when you don't feel like making it happen. No one is going to turn up for you, okay? No one is going to save you, and no one's going to go to the gym for you or do your meal prep for you. And that's something that if you complain about it, then you shouldn't be doing comp prep. This is going to be on you, okay? Be prepared for a certain level of body dysmorphia, but also learn to compare your photos from now to when you begin. Because unfortunately, you will become rather critical of your body image and sometimes weight focused in prep. It is very important to look back on your progress as often as you can to encourage you to keep persevering. Remaining less emotional towards the data of your weight trends saves you an incredible amount of distress. It is very normal to fluctuate and have weight changes towards the end of prep. You're going to look and feel fairly flat, which can lead competitors to believe that they have lost muscle mass, but in reality, they're just simply depleted of glycogen stores. So if you're one of those people towards the end of prep, maybe you haven't competed yet, or maybe you're yet to compete next season, just be aware that there will be a point in the final weeks of prep where you will think, oh my God, where is my muscle gone? I look lean, but I don't have as much muscle. And that's just that your muscles are empty of glycogen, extra carbohydrates that you are probably not eating by that point. Also, women will experience larger weight fluctuations than men because of their menstrual cycle during prep. And in fact, even if a menstrual cycle is absent, they will still experience the weight fluctuations without the bleed. So this is a hormonal change. This is why it's incredibly important to track your cycle during your prep and practice transparency with your coach regarding your cycle and where you are in the month. If you have a coach, and I've seen this with some male coaches, who have told you they don't want to know about it, fire your coach. That's disgusting and terrible practice, okay? You need to know where your menstrual cycle is occurring. Your coach needs to know where it's occurring so we can put that together with the data and understand where your fluctuations are and why. Looking at practicing posing as soon as you can and as soon as you decided that you want to compete, honestly, there is no time that is too early to start posing. Unfortunately, some people leave it to the last minute, okay, because they think I'll just, pick it up in a couple of weeks, which is an absolute lie, and can look fairly silly on stage, especially if they tend to be somewhat uncoordinated. Start looking at going into group posing classes in your area, even if you don't think you are looking conditioned enough yet, and possibly with your chosen federations. If you are in your off season, plenty of people actually do this. Also look at onboarding a posing coach, potentially one-on-one. Your comp prep comp prep coach should not be your posing coach unless they include posing in the package, and that will usually cost a little bit more. And obviously, people don't understand that they do, but I don't think people get that each individual service requires time and effort. So of course it's going to cost more. Perhaps looking at one-on-one sessions, okay? Maybe every fortnight, I'd say 30 weeks out, maybe weekly at 10 weeks out. It's different for everybody, but it just depends on, I suppose, the frequency that you require to get up to scratch, and your posing coach may even recommend that you do weekly sessions a little bit earlier than that, just to be ready in time. This will depend on how quickly you pick up your posing. Some final points to remember while remaining humble in the process of competition prep. Only compare yourself to where you are now, from where you are now to from where you started, okay? So obviously if you had interruptions such as surgeries, sickness, or injuries, etc. in between, this should all be taken into consideration. Bouncing back from challenges in prep is incredibly important. Spending as little time on the ground as possible, suffering or complaining as much as possible. And your ability to reset from adversity is incredibly important. Obviously, competition prep, is going to span across a long period of time, and there will be plenty of challenges thrown into the mix of things. It's just the reality of it. It is more important, that you deal with those and how you deal with those challenges, rather than obviously whether they've been thrown at you or whether you were unlucky or think that the world is against you. Everybody is going to go through difficulty and struggle in prep, and life doesn't just pause itself while you're prepping. That's something I say a lot to competitors. As much as, yes, it's terrible if you get sick or you get an injury or something shitty happens, it kind of just happens, because comp prep, if it takes 6 months, a year, 3 years, there's going to be setbacks. What did you expect to happen? You chose to do something which you don't want interruptions for, and all of a sudden the universe gives you no interruptions. Comparing yourself to other competitors is also completely useless, even though, yes, you will be competing against them. This process is less about what other people are doing or have done towards their goals, and more about what you are doing towards yours. When you're running a 100-meter race, do you look into the left or right-hand lane continuously? No, because that's going to slow you down and obviously steer you off track. Understanding that the sport is subjective, okay, and hence why people don't think it's actually a sport, because there's no actual measurable, quantifiable, numerical types of scoring or anything. It's just based on the way that people, think you look. You're going to be judged by anywhere between 4, maybe 5 to 8 people sitting on a table, okay, who've never met you before, who get to see you for 5 minutes on stage and who are not just looking at you. They're looking at obviously the other 10, 11 people who can be on stage at the same time. It's important to remember that you are not unworthy based on the opinions of bodybuilding judges, okay? They have a job to do, and sometimes we won't agree with their calls, and trust me, there's been many occasions, in fact even recently at the most recent show over the weekend, that I didn't understand what happened and I didn't agree with the judging, and not just from a bias, but because it didn't make any sense. In some federations, unfortunately, their marking can be a little bit inconsistent as well, which I won't make any special mention of, but this will be something that you learn along your journey. There is literally nothing you can do about it once you step off that stage. In some federations, you might do incredibly well in some divisions, and in others, you may not place at all. It really is just very dependent on their criteria and finding the right federation for you. Sometimes it can take a couple of shows, and this is why it's important to try a few different feds if you can. Practicing sportsmanship is another essential component and consideration. I've seen far too many competitors bitching and complaining about each other and their coaches in the process, and trust me, backstage you hear all of it. Bitterness looks terrible on people, and it's incredibly taxing on your coach and on yourself. And if you do bitch about your coach or other competitors, you're going to want to bet that it's going to get back to them, because this is a very, very small industry. It's happened a few times myself where I've overheard conversations. I haven't carried it on myself, but I thought, you know what, imagine if someone was listening and they were close by. Things like engaging in gossip and talking crap about your coach or other competitors is incredibly toxic and only feeds the issues that the industry already has. Keep your head above the water and look at things retrospectively and remove the emotions surrounding your insecurities as much as possible. If you need to take time after a show to cool down before blowing up or putting something crazy on social media, please do that, because trust me, we've all been there. We've all wanted to do it before. I've been very tempted many times, but it just doesn't really do any good. And unfortunately, it just gets you even more worked up. You know, once the judging is done, it's done. You can't undo it. Shooting other people down for their accomplishments or accusing them of PED use or not being natural, when you really don't know. If you do know and they've told you they're users, well, that's a different case. But you don't know whether or not they are or not. This can come across as terrible sportsmanship as well. Sometimes it can be liberating to celebrate another person's accomplishments, pat them on the back, and congratulate them for when they do well, seeing them more as an inspiration than as a threat, and possibly looking at some of the positive traits and qualities they may have as a competitor, which helped them achieve the results so they did. Not necessarily who their coach was, okay, or whether you think that they are paying off the judges, because I can guarantee that doesn't have a lot to do with it. Learn to take feedback on the chin, okay? Sometimes feedback can be incredibly crucial because it can let you know where you need to go from there. Or just don't get feedback at all from the judges if you kind of figured out what you think you know you need to do. Sometimes it's nice just to go on your own way. There are very rare instances of genetic freaks walking into shows and winning every single division they enter, and overall, there's usually one every season at the most. But, you know, they probably know that they're genetic freaks, so that's how they end up competing. It might be you, but it also might not be. It's important not to get ahead of yourself and think that you are going to be the next pro athlete just because you want to be. Some people literally try for years on end to achieve an overall win, let alone pro status. In fact, if you already dig deep enough, you can see that, if you really dig deep enough, you can see that some people have competed for, say, 4 to 6 plus years and haven't achieved the goal that they wanted to, even if they originally set out to get an overall or a pro card, that they've got neither of those things in that frame of time. I saw a bikini competitor over the weekend who she actually was talking about how she'd spent 6 years, I think, training for it in 4 seasons in that time before getting a bikini overall, getting very close each time. Another thing to consider is that social media is never an accurate representation of the way that people actually look in person. There are going to be some people who are very good at taking pictures in the perfect lighting, for example, who might look really different on show day. You might be having a bit of a Instagram stalk, which is a bit toxic in itself. I never did it. I just steer clear of it. But then you don't even end up competing against the person on the day. So you freaked yourself out for no reason, because you're not in any of their divisions. So they might be short, you might be tall, they might have been competing for years and you're a rookie. Spend less time psyching yourself out about who you're going to compete against and focus more on being your best version of yourself. You can't control who you will be competing against, okay? Like, you can't stop them from stepping on stage. So obsessing about it and getting cranky about it isn't going to change anything either. And finally, last of all, but actually probably most importantly as you start to near the end of your prep, is reversing out from your show, okay? Don't be hasty to finish up your coaching quickly, as you will need your coach now more than ever. And in fact, a lot of people say that reversal is much harder than prep itself. When you finish your shows, unfortunately, you will have a spike in hunger hormones as your calories increase gradually coming out of a show. Very normal. Without any sort of solid goals ahead of yourself, to compete anytime soon, it can be often seen that you will slide down a slippery slope with consuming in excess of calories, binging or hoarding food, etc. It becomes such an easy process to fall into because you don't need to be lean anytime soon, right? Just remember that it's not that there aren't any goalposts, it's just that the goalposts have been moved. After your show, they're not as close, but you probably still have some goals ahead of you. And I always say this to people as well who can kind of fall into the trap of, I'm just going to eat what I want and binge and go crazy. And I know it sounds brutal, but it's like, your goal, isn't to step on stage anytime soon, but your goal is not to gain an excess of body fat in a short space of time either. Your goal, just because you don't have a specific goal close doesn't mean that you should drop your thoughts of your health and your well-being altogether and obviously, completely disregard the whole concept of reversing out and taking care of yourself. You don't want to have any regrets about making silly choices for weeks on end, only then to feel like absolute crap physically and mentally for doing so. Just as it is important to try to steer clear of food fixation in prep, okay? Not saving photos of food on Instagram or teasing yourself with random pages of food recipes, etc. It is just as key to do this when you are reversing out. So I've seen this more with first-time competitors getting a bit obsessive with food and food pictures. One of my biggest tips for reversal is that the food will always be there, okay? You do not need to try to eat all of it at once. Caramel tart, for example, yummy, but it still exists. It's going to exist next week. It's going to exist in 6 months. It's not like caramel tart is going to be extinct. So you can try that later and try something, special this week, and then maybe next week it can be something else, but not squishing it all into a short space of time. Give yourself plenty of time, okay, to overcome your cravings, and eventually they may even subside. That's what I found. I was craving like sausage rolls and pies in prep, and then I gave it enough time and now I don't want them at all. It's not to say that you won't be able to enjoy some treats post-show, okay, but be careful becoming too focused on what your post-show meal is and less focused on your prep and your show efforts, because this probably shows that your priorities aren't really in the right order. Unfortunately, this can often lead into developing eating disorders, unhealthy relationship with food, and unhealthy amounts of body fat gain in excess post-show. And if you already say to yourself, look, I don't want to compete again, you'd be surprised how many people turn around in a year or two and go, I'd love to compete again, and they've piled on 40 kilos or 35 kilos they didn't need. Unfortunately, I've seen this far too often, with my own competitors. It's not preventable. You can tell them as many times as you like, please don't do that. It's not smart, it's not healthy, but at the end of the day, it's really up to you as to whether you choose to do this. It will entirely depend on your personality and what works best for you. And this will be involving chatting with a coach. It's incredibly important throughout the process of dieting and reversal to establish what the right approach for you might be in both your prep and dieting phases. So, whether you, take on a restrictive meal plan during prep, it can be helpful for some. And I've heard this in other podcasts as well, like other coaching podcasts, that they say, like, I try to eliminate food variety and, make my food really bland because that really helps with my prep and makes me not crave more, yummy food. I think that's an interesting concept, and some people could absolutely stick to that. But it's not that clean cut. It's not a clean cut science of keep everything bland and hope for the best. If you can imagine going without some taste that you enjoy for 30, 40 weeks, what's going to be your experience of tasting that, initially when you come out of prep for the first time? Will that elicit binge eating behaviors? And we don't know that about everybody. So sometimes it can be important to incorporate some of those flavors into your prep, maybe for you, for example. Unfortunately, post-show, we do see a lot of people going crazy with food, and sometimes no matter what you do, it's not preventable unless they apply the methods and control around that. It will be important to incorporate some flexibility with family members and friends reversing out of your show, but you will need to track your calories and macros or follow a meal plan, mostly for the first 6 to 8 weeks. So we're talking like 90% adherence. at least to allow for adequate recovery for your metabolic pathways and to get your hunger hormones under control so that you don't pile on unnecessary body fat too quickly. We do see a bit of insulin resistance post-show, and this is why we don't just skyrocket you up to your actual maintenance calories quickly, because unfortunately we don't actually get the response that we want to facilitate from the body always. It's much easier for men than it is for women, because women have, generally we find, stronger adaptations and certainly a more difficult time with insulin resistance. Men bounce back a bit faster. Obviously, one of the major goals post-show will be returning your body fat to healthier levels. So again, don't try and sustain low body fat, let alone moderately low body fat, especially for women, which will see that you have, when you do return to a healthier body fat range, you have stable blood results, and for women, a regular menstrual cycle is certainly indicative of that. And for men, it's going to be your testosterone levels and your general recovery and things like fatigue, and even for women, fatigue as well and recovery. This may take some time though, up to 6 months and even a year for everything to return to normal again. Crazy, right? So it took roughly a year for my cycle to become more regular, and that was with plenty of food. But it was 6 months to even get my period back. Crazy. So it's incredibly important though that you do not continue to restrict calories throughout this process, and that you give your body plenty of time to repair. Do not try and sustain lean conditioning. Unfortunately, with prolonged dieting and sustaining low body fat, I've mentioned in a previous podcast, there are far too many negative impacts on health and risks for muscle wastage, developing an eating disorder, and extreme body dysmorphia, amongst others. To finish up, just remember to enjoy your show day, because it really does go by so quickly. In the blink of an eye, it's literally 5 minutes on stage, per time, and you might go on 3 or 4 or 5 times and then you're done. If you're in a shitty mood, you're going to have a shitty day, okay? If you're nervous, that's completely normal, and try to turn that into excitement. You've worked so hard towards your goals, and it's important to soak up the moment while you can. Take photos, of course, but please focus on your stage times and make sure that you have fun. Also, be careful backstage, not just eating a fuck ton of carbohydrates and binging on food because you can see other people doing it. Stick to the plan, because then you've got something to work off of if you've got another show, and just, make sure that you don't self-sabotage one day based off of, maybe 30, 40 weeks plus of hard work. A happy person on stage, I'll finish with this. A happy person on stage is a confident person, and the judges love a confident person. So make sure that you treat this as one of the best days of your life, because it truly will be. From my experience, it definitely was. You make memories for life, and you can completely change your persona in a really positive way, instilling serious self-discipline throughout a comp prep journey. And it's, as I said, not for the faint-hearted in previous times, but by the same token, if you've listened to the whole podcast and you think, you know what, I think I can actually do all of these things, I think I could tick those boxes, then by all means engage in a comp prep process. You can slide into my DMs if you want. I've got a very full season for season B specifically. I definitely am maybe looking at, taking on a couple clients for season A at the most. But it really is, important that you get these considerations down pat before you even think about taking on a prep. Thanks a lot for listening to the podcast, and I'm looking forward to doing another one for you very soon. Bye.